Hello, and welcome back to the Ninox Learning Channel. My name is Andy. I'm a Ninox programmer and trainer with a company called Nioxus. And in this class, the third in our 600 level solution series, we're going to talk about an interesting topic that people don't think about, but they want to use it all the time, and it's called chaining records or record chaining. The concept of chaining records is the idea that we're going to link or we're going to build a chain of records, one after the other, with every record being linked to or connected to or related to the record that came before it. Let me give you some common examples where record chaining is really, really useful. Some people have databases where they're tracking their weight or their physical fitness, and they want to track their previous weight and then their new weight. Well, the record where they enter the new weight is chained to the previous record, because the difference between their old weight and their new weight is how much weight they've lost. We will very often see people building Ninox databases to reconcile bank accounts or checking accounts, savings or investment accounts, where the balance on this day started with the ending balance of the previous day. And today's ending balance would be tomorrow's beginning balance. Each day's balance is chained or linked to the previous record. And the example that we're going to be looking at in this class, the travel journal. We're taking a trip, we're taking a vacation, and we want to keep track of where we are every day and how many miles we've driven. How much did we spend on gas? What's our miles per gallon over the course of our trip? We might even want to track maintenance and maybe even take some pictures along the way. The idea of a travel journal or a travel log is each morning your beginning location was yesterday's ending location. Your beginning mileage tomorrow is exactly the same as your ending mileage today. And tomorrow's ending mileage will be the beginning mileage for the next day after that. This link, this chain of records, one day at a time, making entries in our log. Where were we when we started the day? Where did we end up? How many miles did we drive? Did we buy gas? If so, how much? And if we bought gas today, when was the last time we bought gas? Because we want to know how many miles are between fill-ups, how many days are we going before we have to fill the tank again. So our ability to track how long did our tires last? Well, we need to track when we replaced them, but we also need to chain that back to when we bought them in the first place, so we know how long we've been on the same set of tires. How many miles have we driven each day, each week, each month? What's our miles per gallon, per day, per week, per state, per fill-up? Each record in the journal is chained or linked to the record that came before it, the record from the previous day. Now, when we take all of these records as a whole, that entire chain was built one link at a time, one travel day at a time. Now, we know how to link tables. We've talked about inner joins and outer joins. We've talked about parent-child relationships. We can even, through API integration, link entire databases. But how do we link records that exist in the same table? Here's what you do not ever want to do. You don't want to link a table to itself. So the record that we would enter on Tuesday, that is a record that exists in the same table as the record that was entered the previous day on Monday. We do not want to link the Tuesday table to the Monday table. It's the exact same table, and you never want to link a table to itself. So the question remains, how do we link one record in a table to a previous record in the same table? Let's take a look and see it in action. We've built our journal. Our journal has one entry. Our trip began just a few days ago, and this is what that entry looks like. We are utilizing some of the new features in the newest, latest, and greatest version of Ninox, version 2.6. So our buttons are now icons in a button bar at the top of the screen. But it's still Ninox, so let's take a look at what we have here. We have, in fact, multiple chains being built one link at a time. We have a mileage chain, where today's ending miles are tomorrow's beginning miles. We have a location chain, in fact, 3 of them. Today's ending location is where tomorrow will begin. The ending city and state on this day of travel is the beginning or the starting city and state on tomorrow's day of travel. And of course, we want to track fuel. We bought fuel on October 2nd. The next time we buy fuel, we're going to want to know how many days we went and how many miles we went between fill-ups. At the same time, we can track how many miles we traveled, how many gallons we used for the entire trip, and we can calculate our total cost of fuel, our miles per gallon, our days per gallon, all sorts of things that we can do by chain linking each travel record, each journal entry in our travel log to the entry that was made the day before. So how do you do this? There's 2 ways. You can look at the current record and use that as the jumping off point to build the next link in the chain, or you can build the next link in the chain and look backwards and link it to the previous one. I strongly recommend the first option. Start with where you are now, and then link the next record going forward. So this is the record from yesterday's day of travel, which is going to be the beginning starting point for the next day of travel. Let's see how it works. Yesterday was the first day of our vacation, as noted in the journal entry right there. We started the day with 129 miles on the odometer and completed the day with 284 miles on the odometer, having traveled 155 miles. We started at Cincinnati Reds Baseball Stadium in Cincinnati, Ohio, and ended at Churchill Downs, the famous horse race track, home of the Kentucky Derby, in Louisville, Kentucky. We also purchased 36 gallons of fuel at a cost of approximately $2.17 per gallon for a total cost of $78.25. So far, based on what we have spent on fuel and the 155 miles we have driven, we're averaging about 4 miles per gallon, and our fuel is costing us about 50 cents per mile. And since we've only driven one day, we see here our average miles driven per day is only 155 miles. It is now day 2 of our vacation. And as I said, we're going to use the previous day's journal entry as the starting point for the next day, the jumping off point for that next link in the chain. We are going to add new miles today, and to do that, we're going to go ahead and click on the odometer. Please note the ending miles, location, city, and state of our journey so far. When I click the odometer to enter the next journal entry in our travel log, yesterday's activities is where we are now beginning. It is now the next day in our trip. We started with 284 miles on the odometer. We had a big day of travel today, ending up with 689 miles on the odometer, having traveled 405 miles. We started at Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. We ended up in historic Williamsburg, and that is in the state of Virginia. And of course, the city that is home to historic Williamsburg is, of course, Williamsburg, Virginia. We didn't buy any gas today. We didn't spend any money on service or maintenance, so that'll complete the log entry for the day. Now you'll notice down here that we are keeping a running log. At the top of the screen, we have our travel log and journal entry happening up here. This is where we track our mileage, our maintenance, and our fuel use. Down here, we have a running list day by day of where we started, where we ended, the miles we drove that day, the gallons of fuel that were purchased, and the cost of our fuel. Again, we started this trip on the 2nd. On the 4th, we drove 405 miles, covering a lot of distance, but we didn't buy any fuel. Let's now move into the next day of our trip. Let's go ahead and click the odometer again in order to bring up the next third day in our travel journal. We'll note the date. Again, this day's starting miles were yesterday's ending miles. This day we had a lot of travel. We ended up with 1,024 miles on the odometer, covering 335 miles. We started off in Williamsburg, Virginia. We ended up at Dolphin Stadium in Miami, Florida. And we also purchased fuel on this day of travel. We purchased 40 gallons at $3 a gallon for $120 total cost of fuel. And this would conclude this day, this third link in our chain. Up here we see the details of this link, this single day of travel. Here we see the chain with all of its links, 3 so far, being presented. And you'll notice it's in reverse order. Yesterday is always going to be at the top of the list, with the first day of the trip being at the bottom. It's as easy as clicking on the entry date and changing it to ascending order if you wanted to reverse that. I'm going to go ahead and keep this in descending order. But we see this chain getting longer and longer. Every day of travel is a new link in the chain, a new record linked to the previous day's record. We are continuing to add on mileage. We're tracking our locations, maybe some notes, maybe even some photographs. We have a photo journal built into our travel log, maybe photographs of the different places we have stopped, and of course tracking our maintenance and our fuel cost and usage. So, how do we link the links to the chain? How do we make sure that tomorrow picks up where today leaves off? Well, it is very, very simple, and it all happens here on the button, in this case the odometer icon, that we click to create the next link in the chain. Here we are on this day of travel. To start the next day of travel, we would click on this button, which will open a new record, which will have the next date of travel, and we continue to add links. So how does this work? Let's go in and take a look at the code behind this button. It's very, very simple. In fact, 12 lines of code that couldn't be easier to understand. First, we establish the existence of 5 variables. Our ending variables, our ending miles, the last date of the last time we got fuel, the state where yesterday's travels ended, the city, and the exact location, again, where yesterday's travels ended. We then, on line 6, create a new record in our journal. And that record has 6 fields in it. And those 6 fields are populated automatically on lines 7 through 12. On line 7, we indicate that the entry date is today. We indicate that our starting miles today are the ending miles from yesterday. The date of our last fuel stop, that's just continuing on and on and on. And if we get fuel on any particular day, then that will become the last date we got fuel. So the links in the fuel chain are a little further apart. The links in the mileage chain, there's one for every day that we drive. And we might be driving every single day. but we may not be getting fuel, recharging our gas every single day. So therefore, those links may be not one day after another. But we can always track the last fill up, which will allow us to keep performance records on how many miles did we get until the next fill up. Finally, the starting state, the starting city, and the starting location for today's record, is yesterday's ending state, ending city, and ending location. And finally, on line 13, we present the new record. We move on to the next link in the chain. How did we do that? We used the pop-up record command, and we specifically identified the record we want to pop, the record we want to view. It is the record in our journal table that is identified according to the ID number of the record I. And which record is the record I? It is this record that was created right here. We created a new record in the journal, and we assigned a pointer, an indicator, to the variable I that says this is the identity, this is the unique identifier, the ID of the newly created record. So every reference to the letter I is a reference to this newly created record. I made a bit of a mistake. It's really more of a redundancy, but I did it to make a point. We did not really need the .id. This dot after the indicator or variable I is calling a specific field in the table. Which table? Well, I is pointing to the table called journal. We established that in line 6 of our code. We went on to specifically identify a record by calling its ID, by pointing to the ID field. But here's the little mistake. Here's the redundancy. I is that ID number. The pointer that was established in the variable I with this statement on line 6 basically says, create a new record in this table, and whatever ID number, the unique numeric identifier that Ninox assigns to that record, store that value in this variable, in this case, I. Therefore, this would have worked just as well. However, and this is why we had the redundancy, at some point we need to specifically identify I as a number, because we are using the record function in the Ninox programming language. The Ninox function record takes two parameters. The first parameter is the name of a table, a text field, or a text string, if you will. Comma separates the parameters, and the second parameter is numeric. It is the number that is the unique identifier of the record in this aforementioned table. The letter I, or the variable I, established and populated in row 6, contains that value, but I has not been explicitly defined as a number. It is a pointer, which is numeric content, but a pointer is not a numeric field. Therefore, I point to a specific field, the ID field, which is numeric, which makes this a numeric value, which complies with the rules established for the record function. Two parameters. The first one a text field, the second one a numeric value. This is a pointer value. This is the numeric result of that pointer. The other way that we could have done this would be to go in and say, let y equal the numeric value of I. And then go in here and specify Y. Here we established a variable that contains a pointer, making it a pointer variable. Here we established another variable called Y and inserted in that new variable Y the numeric value of the pointer in I. And here we popped up the record, specifically the record in the journal table that is numbered Y, or the numeric representation of the pointer. I know it sounds complex, and really the easiest way to do this is just to go in, indicate the pointer, be a little duplicative, be a little repetitive, put in .id to refer to that numeric field. It'll work perfectly well. We go ahead and accept this code, and this is how we build our chain, one link at a time. You will notice that my links are stacking up on each other. Every time I click on the odometer, let's exit administrative mode, every time I click the button to add a new link to the chain, a new entry in my travel journal for each day of travel, the links are stacking up. The reason that's not going to be a problem is because of the way this database would most likely be used. What's going to happen is, and I'm going to go ahead and select all those records I just created and delete them, and go back to day one of our trip. We would go in to day one, click the button to enter day two, put in day two's mileage, and if there were any fuel purchases, and I'll say that there were, let's say we purchased another 40 gallons of gas, this time it was $4 a gallon, so that's $160, and we would note the ending city and state and location. Then we'd be done for the day. We'd close the record, very likely close our database, maybe shut down or at least put to sleep the laptop or the desktop or the smart device that's running Ninox, and we would be done for the day. When it is time to enter the next record, we would come back into our travel database, go to our journal, bring up the record for the last day of travel, and then create the record for the next day. Enter all of our information, shut things down, go to sleep, wake up, and the next day we continue the process of bringing up the previous day, clicking the button to add the next link. So we shouldn't have a problem with multiple days stacking up with each other, assuming we're entering our mileage, our maintenance costs, and our fuel usage and fuel purchases each day of the trip. Now, I understand, and of course that's not always practical. For instance, if you're keeping a weight loss journal, you may not be weighing in every single day. If you're tracking your blood pressure, or your heart rate, or you're tracking stocks where last night's closing value is the next day's value at the opening bell. If you're tracking bank accounts, anything where the next record is chained or linked back to the previous record. The previous record does not have to be yesterday. It might have been 30 days ago. It might have been 90 days ago if you're tracking things on a quarterly basis. The point I want to make is if you go in, and whether you use an odometer or an icon or a button, use whatever works for your user experience and for the user interface you want to present, just remember this very simple block of code. Capture the ending values for this current link in the chain. Create the new link in the chain. And assign the starting values of the new record, the new link, the values in the previous records, the previous links, ending fields. Where we ended up before is where we start today. And where we end up today is where we will start with the next link in the chain. Doesn't matter if that next link is created tomorrow, next week, next month, next quarter, or even next year. This is also great, by the way, for grandparents who want to track the height of their grandchildren, or parents who want to track the growth of their children. you can do this easily in a Ninox database. And that's how simple it is to chain records together. We don't link one record to another record in the same table using the traditional linking mechanisms and tools that we've learned about in Ninox. We link in the sense of a chain. We simply take the last record and chain link the next record by creating a button that says, this is where we are now, let the ending point now be the starting point for the next link in the chain, the next record in the table. This travel log is one of our new applets that you'll be able to download starting next week at the Nioxus member portal. This particular applet has a service log, a maintenance history, a photo album. You can view your fuel ledger, and you can in fact map out your travel route based on where you started and ended up each day, tracking your latitude and longitude using the location fields in Ninox, and actually see your chain, see your map, your route as you take your journey. So if you'd like to have a copy of this, you'll be able to download it starting next week in the new applet section at the Nioxus member portal. That's it for today's solution training class in our 600 level series on the Ninox Learning Channel. And then again, in this series, we're not looking at specific functions as much as we are focusing on how to bring various functions together to create entire solutions in the Ninox system. I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope you use the travel log to take and record some great journeys. And I really hope you'll join us for the next class next week in the 600 Solution Series, when we're going to be presenting an applet that lots of people have been asking for, the medicine cabinet. This is where you can keep track of your prescriptions, your exercise, your weight loss. You can track your blood pressure. If you're diabetic, you can track your insulin levels and your sugar levels. This is an applet that lots of people have been asking for, and it's going to be released next week on the Learning Channel in the next series of our 600 Solution Series for Ninox. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being part of the global Ninox community, and thanks for supporting all that we do here at Nioxus. I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope you'll come back and join me again. Go out, build some cool Ninox databases, and please join us next week here on the Ninox Learning Channel. Bye-bye, everybody.